Hello, everyone. So, in this lecture, I want to cover the end of the Great War and how the end of the Great War brought forward the Second World War. Right. So, I want to go over the Treaty of Versailles. I want to compare it to Wilson's 14 points, and basically, I want to explain why the Germans felt betrayed, why the resentment sowed, all these different problems that eventually happened in the 1920s and 30s, leading to the Second World War. So, let's get started. Right, so I'm going to concentrate on the end of the Great War. So I'm going to kind of sort of skip forward almost the entirety of the war, right? So I want to concentrate on the beginning of the end, and that happens towards the end of 1917, right? So by the end of 1917, most of these big players of the First World War had already abandoned the war, either because, for example, Austria-Hungary had disintegrated, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Russians had a revolution. So what happened was that these nations couldn't keep up with the pace, of fighting. For this time, these nations had used a lot of resources, and back at home, a lot of the people were suffering. So think about it like this: a lot of the people at home, were under big rations, or they didn't even have enough food, or there's a lot of general discontent. So most of these nations began collapsing, right? So towards the end of 1917, only France and England remains on one side and Germany on the other. So at the same time, America has joined the war on the side of France and England, right? So with England, France, and the US, it seems like Germany is really cornered, right? The war is about to be over. However, the US does not enter the war with the intention of punishing Germany. The way the Americans saw it was that they entered the war to protect democracy. And in this way, the way they saw it was their war is against the German government, not against the German people. All right. So, as opposed to, for example, Britain and France, they do hold a grudge, and very understandable because they've been fighting with Germany for all these years and, millions of casualties. And they just want to see an end to the war in which they're going to punish Germany. And they're going to see basically, some, I don't want to say a reward, but they want to win the war, and basically get something out of it, right? Remember, these are still empires. So colonial acquisitions, expansion, natural resources, things like that was the expectation for Britain and France. All right. So America joins the war without that same idea. All right. The way they called it was peace without victory. The idea was that for the US, as long as the German Kaiser abdicated, they really don't have a grudge against Germany. And so on January of 1918, Wilson presents to Congress his idea for his vision for post-war Europe, right? The way he envisions would be the best way to avoid future wars. And, this all reflects the idea of peace without victory, right? He doesn't want any real punishment. He doesn't want any harsh, treatment towards anyone. And the idea is basically he has 14 points. I'm not gonna go over all of them. I'm gonna focus on three that are important for our causes, and the first one is going to be self-determination. Okay, so the way Wilson sees it is that nations should be able to decide their own fate, right? They should be able to decide, whether they want to be a colony, where they want to be a democracy, what they should be. All right. The second one is the idea of a League of Nations. Okay, so we also believe that we should all, form what today is the UN basically. And, this would be like a talking table where all the nations could, settle any disputes or any confusion that they may have between one another and another. And the other one is on arms reduction. Okay, so basically we should all have less weapons, and that way we're gonna have less of a possibility of war, right? So there's more things like free trade and freedom of the seas and other things, but these are the most important for our cause today. Okay, so uh, this is the vision of Wilson to avoid future wars, and what kind of like encompasses the idea of peace without victory. Now, the problem with Wilson's 14 points is that they're very idealistic. Don't get me wrong, these are all very good ideas, but you need to put it in the context of 1918 Europe, all right? This nation had just endured tremendous losses, all right? Economically, physically, lives, you name it. This is the biggest conflict the world has ever seen. And if you put yourself in the shoes of nations like England and France, they don't want to end the war and, see their enemy, Germany, just walk away scot-free, all right? They want to punish Germany, all right? And in a lot of ways, very understandably so, right? So Wilson coming and saying like, you know what, it's fine, let's all be friends, let's just end the war as is, and we'll have free trade, and we're all gonna be like democratic nations. I know you all have colonies, but you all need to let go of the colonies, and we all need to be friendly. You know, it is very idealistic. It is a very good idea, but in the context of when it happened, it was very unrealistic that England and France were just going to drop everything and just follow the lead of Wilson, all right? Particularly because the way they see it, Wilson and America have not been fighting this war for the last 3 years and enduring millions of casualties, right? So it feels this big disconnect between what the European nations who are winning the war feel versus what Wilson feels the war should look like. Now, very understandably, Germany is in the same side of America, right? Germany feels like this idea of peace without victory can be a really good solution for ending the war with their head up high. Basically, they didn't lose it. Basically, the war's over. The way the Germans understand it, like, hey, like we all participated on it. If you really think about it, who's the bad guy here? We all did things that were wrong, but there's no reason why Germany should be the one who's blamed for the entirety of the war, right? When everyone participated on it. And, not just that everyone participated on it, right? But everyone had interest in starting and ending the war because they're all seeing the idea of when I win the war, I want my colonies, I want my territorial acquisitions, I want expansion. So everyone is participant on it, all right? So Germany doesn't see a reason why, they should be seen as the bad guys. Okay, so very understandably so, they're on the side of America, on the idea of peace without victory. Okay, so uh, it is very interesting what is going to happen next, right? Because when Germany, is close to collapse, and the Kaiser abdicates on November 9, and they basically begin the negotiations for a ceasefire, this armistice, they're under the understanding that the negotiation for peace will look like the idea of Wilson. And so what happens next is a major, major blunder. It's probably one of the biggest mistakes of the 20th century because this is what's going to lead to World War II, and this is the Treaty of Versailles, right? The Treaty of Versailles does not look like anything like Wilson proposed and looks almost identical to what England and France were proposing, right? So when they're negotiating this peace treaty, Wilson is seen as like you don't have a say in this, right? England and France take the lead in the negotiation, and actually Germany is not even invited to the negotiation, right? So basically, England and France between them, they decide how the end of the war should look like, all right? So it's going to have massive, massive punishments. You can see it as retribution, you can see it as punishment, however you see it. But the goal was we need to make Germany feel the pain, all right? They're gonna basically be responsible. So it's the guilt clause in basically making Germany responsible for the entirety of the war, and therefore they need to pay reparations, right? And by the way, those reparations were just barely paid after all these years. They were barely paid like 10 or 15 years ago, right? So they're going to be forced to pay reparations. They're going to lose a lot of their territories. They're going to lose some colonies. They're going to lose a lot of resources. They're going to be forced to be demilitarized. And, they're going to be humiliated, right? And Germany's basically just handed these terms, and they're basically forced to sign them, all right? So Germany has no say in how the end of the war should look like, all right? How this post-war Europe is supposed to be seen, all right? And the way Germany sees it is kind of like they were tricked into thinking like the negotiation was going to look one way, but it ends up looking a very different way, right? So they're very resentful about, tricking them, or the way they see it, they got tricked. And now they're being forced to sign this document in which, they feel like they didn't lose the war, right? To be honest, Germany was going to lose this war, right? They were probably days, if not maybe a couple months away from losing this war. But the way they see it, they never actually lost it, right? They were forced into a negotiation. And if I'm mentioning this, it's because this will play an important part in World War II, right? Germany feels like they were betrayed. Germany feels like they never really lost this war. They were just being forced into signing a document and they really had no say in it, right? And to make matter worse, in this new League of Nations, that is about the only thing from Wilson's plan that is included. You know, Germany can be included in the League of Nations. Russia cannot be included in the League of Nations. The U.S. decides not to take part in the League of Nations, right? So it's a massive disaster, right? The massive, massive disaster, right? Because at the end of the day, the purpose of the League of Nations was for everyone to be part of it. Friends and enemies, not just your friends, all right? Friends and enemies. So they all can have a conversation to avoid future wars. And so all the circumstances that I mentioned earlier, the guild clause, reparations, demilitarization, losing of territories, losing industrial heartlands, all the different things that I mentioned earlier are going to be great contributors to the German people feeling very resentful, right, over the idea of we were betrayed at the table, right? This is not what we had agreed to, okay? And they feel like the German leadership that replaced the Kaiser after his abdication, they believed that they betrayed the German people, that these people did not take into consideration the years of war that the German people endured, so that they can just end the war in such a catastrophe, right? So they believe it was the leadership. And this is how in the next years there's going to be this myth of the stab in the back myth, right? That the German leadership betrayed their own people because they didn't look out for their best interests. And they're going to start, you know, coming up with all these conspiracy theories about it was all people from Jewish descent, right? It was all people who were, you know, Jewish people who are looking out for their best interest and not for the best interest of the people. And this is why eventually people like Hitler is going to have enormous resentment towards the German leadership, who they feel sold the German people at the table, right? And he has this enormous resentment against the Jews, who he believes were part of all these problems, right? So this is how these resentments are gonna kind of like create all these enormous troubles that it's all going to lead to World War II, right? So this is one of the main reasons, that you need to understand how the circumstances of the Treaty of Versailles are going to lead to World War II, right? It's not just that, the guilt clause and this and that and everything that I just mentioned. It is all the circumstances around there, right? How the Germans were tricked into signing it, how they think that they never actually lost the war, but they could have won the war. And in the 1920s, there's a lot of myths or conspiracy theories going on. Again, the whole we were sold, it was the Jews, the whole we never really lost, if we could do it all over again, we could actually win. So all this myths, if you think about it, or conspiracies, contribute to World War II. All right, because if you think about it, all of them are going to play a role, right? If we could do it all again, if we can do it all over again, we could win it, right? That's what they're going to try to do, right? It was all about, the German leadership and the Jews who sold us, for their own benefit, right? You know what happened with that one. All right. This idea of, you know, it's us against them, right? Is the German people against the world. You know, this is the very reality of the Germans during World War II, right? They feel like it's them who should be fighting the rest of the world because the world is against them, right? So all of these things are big contributors to how eventually the road to World War II played out. All right. So, anyways, guys, this is all I have for you today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be around. Okay, see y'all.